Welcome to the Word of the Day, an expository look at Holy Scripture. My name's Corey Wigington. Today we're still dealing with the acrostic TULIP. Specifically, we're looking at the L in TULIP, or the limited atonement. Now here's what we've learned thus far. When we looked at total depravity, we learned that we are bound in our sin, lost, spiritually dead. We can't respond to God without Him first acting and doing something. And then when we looked at unconditional election, we learned that God has mercy and compassion on whom He wills, regardless of any supposed conditions met by man. It's God who saves, it's God who draws. Now in limited atonement, we find a controversial point, probably the most controversial point in 5-point Calvinism. In fact, there's some people that deny this doctrine and call themselves 4-point Calvinists. I embrace this doctrine, though, as I believe that it logically follows from what we've already learned, and I see some strong biblical support to that end. You see, in the doctrine of limited atonement, we acknowledge that Jesus died a substitutionary death on the cross that satisfied the wrath of God. The only question is, who did Jesus die for? Now, there are two lines of thought here. The first, generally held by Arminians, is that Jesus died for everyone in the world, giving everyone equal opportunity to be saved. And the second line of thought, generally held by Calvinists, is that Jesus died for only those whom had been elected to salvation by the Father. Now let's look at those ideas quickly, because both of those thoughts limit the atonement of Christ in some fashion. So first, if Jesus truly did die for the sins of everyone, as an Arminian would claim, then the atonement is limited in its power. Jesus didn't actually save anyone through His death and resurrection. Something else needs to be done. Jesus only makes salvation a possibility for people, not an actuality. In this reasoning, salvation is only activated when a person places their faith in Jesus through their freedom of choice. People need to do something in order to save themselves. Now, on the other hand, if Jesus died for only those who were elected to salvation, as a Calvinist would claim, then the atonement is limited in its scope, or rather, who it is applied to. Jesus' death and resurrection actually did something and secured salvation for exactly the group of people that God intended. Though it has the power to save the entire world, God only applies it to the people to whom He is elected to salvation. Faith comes as part of the regenerative process, and we are saved not by our will, but by the will of God. I believe that Scripture supports this view. You see, in Matthew 1:21, it says that He will save His people from their sins. In Ephesians 1:4, it says that it is the people that He chose before the foundation of the world who would be holy and blameless before Him. And in John 10:14 through 15, it says that He lays down His life for the sheep, the ones that know Him and the ones that He knows. And in Isaiah 53:12, it says that He bore the sins of many, not all. We have to ask ourselves, what exactly happened in the atonement? Now we see patterns in the Old Testament that apply here. For instance, in Leviticus 4, we see that a lamb without blemish is being offered as a sin offering. And in Leviticus 14, we see where a goat is symbolically sent into the wilderness after the sins of the people have been laid upon it. That's where we get the idea of a scapegoat. Jesus fulfilled the atonement for sin that was only symbolized in the Old Testament. But what does that mean? Well, we have to understand what sin is. It is the knowingly or unknowingly act of violating God's law. And God, being a God of complete truth and justice, cannot simply forgive sin without cause. That would violate His nature. A penalty has occurred through sin. The wages of sin is death. Someone has to die in order to satisfy the wrath and justice of God. Salvation is not us being saved from the clutches of the devil. It's us being saved from the wrath of the holy, just, and pure God who cannot tolerate sin. So the Bible tells us in 2 Corinthians 5:21 that God made Him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf. And Romans 3:22 says that through our faith the righteousness of God is given to us. In other words, all the punishment that we are rightly due because of our sinful rebellion against God is given over to Christ. It is imputed to him. And the righteousness that Jesus innately has, his blamelessness and purity, it's imputed to us through our faith in him. The faith that God gives us. Thusly, the wrath of God is satisfied for all who have received the atonement. God no longer has cause to punish them, but instead welcomes them and says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." So circling back around, if the atonement was for everyone, then everyone has had their sins paid for through the cross. Everyone should be righteous in the eyes of God because they are no longer incurring God's wrath. That would make us universalists, but we know that not everyone is saved. The only thing we can say based on Scripture is that Jesus died for many. That many being the elect of God, his sheep. By paying for their sins, the wrath of God is satisfied for the elect, and they are saved according to God's will. So to sum up, where are we? We are totally depraved, unable to choose God on our own because of our sinful nature. God chooses us through his unconditional election to save some according to his will and not the will or exertion of man. And to that end, he sent Jesus to die on the cross for a specific purpose of saving the people to whom that he had elected to salvation. Thanks for joining us today. I hope to see you next time where we discuss the I in TULIP, irresistible grace. Grace to you and peace.